I'm Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, and tonight I would like to talk about esoterica, or you could say I want to talk about the little-known techniques for developing new skills, new areas of self-awareness. That's really what my previous post about writing by hand was all about. Now, people have, of course, proposed other terms for what I'm talking about. It's been called magic, sorcery, mysticism, all sorts of things. But I like the term esoterica simply because it emphasizes the idea of a thing within, a thing set apart, a thing known by only a few. And happily, it doesn't have the silly associations that come with terms like the occult. What I'll be discussing requires no hypothesized external powers like demons or angels, gremlins, goblins, or leprechauns. Nor does it demand or denigrate the idea of a unitary deity. It should therefore be equally interesting to Christians, pagans, bronies, furries, atheists, worshippers of Kek. Makes no matter. I'll illustrate what I'm talking about with some examples. In upcoming videos, I'll be doing more of this and discussing techniques and perspectives that I found useful. But the idea for now is to get you oriented with examples of what this is all about, and then later to provide you with tools that you can use to open up new channels of communication with yourself. Again, that's really what my previous post about writing by hand and keeping a journal was all about. And again, this is just my take on esoterica, stripped of the robes and daggers, the carnival trappings, the babbling incantations, and all the rest. All that stuff can be endlessly entertaining, but I got it out of my system long ago. What I'm trying to say is that real magic, if you will, is it's mostly about things that we overlook, things that we fail to properly consider, things that surround us at all times, things that pervade our lives, though they're usually entirely unnoticed. One example is the way in which our minds tend to complete any picture that's incomplete. If I see the leg of a deer through the trees, and then its shoulder and head, my mind will tend to assemble these visual fragments into a complete picture. It'll be almost as though I can see the whole deer. But sometimes the way in which our minds assemble all of this sensory data can be entirely wrong, or at least highly ambiguous. Most people have had the experience of mistaking a ball of lint on the floor for a bug of some kind. Or we felt something cold against our skin that we mistook for wet, or even the opposite, mistaking it for something quite hot. The same sort of sensory ambiguity is reflected in many of Dali's paintings, to provide an example. Or you can see it in the old graphic that's either two faces facing each other or a single table, depending on how you look at it, whether you consider the black space to be empty or the white space to be empty. Now, these examples can be easily multiplied. All of this is related to the delay that comes with any message sent from our sensory apparatus along nerves to our brains. Any signal takes a measurable amount of time to travel down a nerve. And while that's happening, our minds are busy trying to create whole pictures as best they can out of a variety of sense impressions that don't arrive all at the same time. That's one of the reasons why our eyes have these massive optic nerves coming out of the back side, allowing us to get visual information to our brains as quickly as possible. Think of them as two high bandwidth nerve eye stalks. And often our other sense impressions are slaved to or organized around the faster optical impression. It just gets there first and serves as the skeleton that we try to organize our sense data around. All this is to say that at any given moment, we're cobbling together very incomplete representations of our surroundings. We're in fact wrapped in a delay of microseconds, forming a vision of our worlds in a minuscule gap in that instant between any given sense impression being received and then processed and assembled. Talking about this is one thing, but coming to feel it, becoming more familiar with it, and even learning to do things with it, things that others never even imagined, can be quite interesting. When I bring up the subject of esoterica, or the subject of what's called magic, I'm talking more about this kind of thing than I am about drawing circles on the ground or reciting barbarous words of invocation. For me, the esoteric is everywhere. It reveals by concealing. It conceals by revealing, for those that are up to it, for those that are interested in it. It's a rewarding subject to think about and explore, whether we wish to use techniques on others, or to avoid having them used on us, or simply to know more about the nature of consciousness. The esoteric is worth the time taken to consider it, at least by my lights. Allow me to illustrate. More often than men, women tend to pay attention, real attention, to the ways in which we can manipulate perceptions. To give just a few examples, heels. They're used to make the legs look longer, to make the calves more taut, to accentuate the shape of the buttocks. The ways in which eyeliner can make eyes seem larger, smaller, closer together, or further apart. Any woman who's fucked about with makeup is aware of this. We also have the entire subject of scent, or I should say more properly, the domain of chemical communication. Here we have a different system than the two eyes on their high bandwidth nerve stalks. Here we have actual physical particles pulled in from the atmosphere through the nose, where they're read, so to speak, by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, in turn, regulates all sorts of other glandular systems. What I'm saying is that sense in the air around us can directly affect everything from metabolic processes to fear responses, even to attachment behaviors. All of this is going on behind the scenes. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. Don't even get me started on the subject of how it's more or less easy to like someone who smells good. And by contrast, if someone stinks like shit, it doesn't matter how visually attractive they are. It's just not going to happen. That is the domain of chemical communication. I wonder if this has anything to do with women saying things like, we have chemistry, or the chemistry just isn't there. I wonder if that has anything to do with their interest in perfumes, creams, and cosmetics. In these areas, women excel, and these techniques can be used to fascinate, to manipulate, to direct or control behavior, at least for a time. I wonder if this has anything to do with all the stories about women with magical powers. From ancient stories about Medea, all the way down to the days when burning witches was all the rage, we can identify strong associations between women and spell casting, potions, and poisons. And we can see that in more than one culture, the path of the aspiring male shaman is to spend time living with women, at least for a time. Dressing is one, learning of their secrets. And when I say secrets, I'm not talking about some witch's Sabbath with goat fucking. I'm talking about things that hide in plain sight. That's a very important point I'm trying to get across. The occult, the hidden, the esoteric, whatever you want to call it. And some terms carry more ridiculous semantic freight than others. Whatever you want to call it, it conceals by revealing. It reveals by concealing. I cannot say this enough. But we don't have to focus only on women. We can look at more general examples of things that we really don't pay enough attention to. How many people give any real thought to what a sneeze is or does? What a yawn does? What that feeling is that you get when you get drawn into a deep stretch and something flows through the body. And yet they claim to want to understand magic powers. They'll study pranayama or swara yoga, the yoga of cycles, which more properly has a lot to do with breath, but most of the people who claim to be into yoga have never fucking heard of swara yoga. Anyway, they'll talk about Ida and Pingala, the nadis of the sun and moon, the central channel of Sushumna when they get into all their chakra stuff, and if they get into it at all with any seriousness with pranayama. But they won't look at anatomical diagrams of the lungs and ask themselves why one lung is made up of 2 sacs and the other lung is made up of 3 sacs. Now, they're admittedly subdivisions, but you could, after a fashion, say that we have 5 lungs. And 2 on one side, 3 in the other. That's almost like odd and even. There's almost a division there that bears consideration. It might even drag one down a rabbit hole of Pythagorean considerations about even and odd, which you can see in the I Ching as the split line and the unbroken one, yin and yang. These are qualitative considerations that usually don't make it into science. But my point is that for all that people will go grubbing about in the dirt for every kind of weird so-called magical or occult thing, again, they ignore what's right there in front of them. So to continue with the example of pranayama, they'll practice all sorts of breath tricks, but they don't consider the fact that the earth itself breathes in cycles, determined by the presence or absence of the sun. Why isn't anybody bothered to look at the relative levels of oxygen during the day and night in the atmosphere based on photosynthesis, and then consider, again, the possible symbolism of the sun breath and the moon breath? There's also the world of advertising, which I see as a kind of pernicious, tarted up hedge sorcery designed to manipulate the witless, which is one of the purposes to which esoteric knowledge is often put. I spent years watching and learning the diabolical arts as currently practiced in the mostly leftist advertising agencies. And I found it instructive, though it does require a strong stomach. Now, I call advertising, marketing, and all the rest of the shit sorcery for very good reason. And if you think I'm crazy to assert such a thing, I would like to remind you that the word marketing comes from the same root as merchant and mercenary. It comes from the same root as Mercury, Roman god of gamblers, liars, thieves, merchants, and specialists in certain mysteries. For those of you aware of the correspondence between Mercury and Hermes, I can point you to thrice great Hermes, Hermes Trismegistus. This evolutionary breakthrough, the ability to speak, the ability to communicate, which is central to the archetype of Hermes, it always brings with it the ability to lie. The mouth that opens to utter a communication can also utter a falsehood. And that is why in the old tarot decks, the second card, the first numbered card, the Magus, it shows a juggler, a con artist, a man with his trickery laid out on the table before him. I think, if I'm not butchering the French, the old French title is Le Bateleur, which means the juggler, the prestidigitator, the one who will craft all sorts of illusions, because that is the power to utter speech, to enunciate a spell. Words spell spells, and the slumbering herd compels y'all's bent neck credit check and well-trained insects. Worldwide cash pride and state-sponsored homicide. I missed that opening song. It might have to come back. But I don't want to get too far afield. So meanwhile, against this background, with all this naked before our eyes, this world full of mysteries hiding in plain sight. We have those who want to go looking for magic in hard-to-find tomes that are often full of nothing more than bullshit. Full of the names of demons and angels, of cherubim, seraphim, and thrones. They want to wave wands or stick their daggers, their athames, into cups of cheap wine while talking about the rule of three, blessed be. Most people fail to realize that in reality, this is a view of magic or the esoteric that is formed by the illiterate. I say formed by illiterates because all of this smacks of the way a savage would interpret the power of one who can write and use mathematics. Tim likes to use the example of the tall, pointed Roman traveling hat, which would have been seen by the natives, worn by Romans passing through places like Gaul and Britain, and hence associated with what the natives, the illiterates in this example, would have seen as the magical powers of the Romans. Things like engineering and mathematics. Next thing you know, the tall pointed hat that the barbarians saw somehow makes its way into our collective unconscious as the archetypal wizard's hat. Even when some of the old techniques were not bullshit, and this was sometimes the case, even when they did have esoteric uses or value, for example, the artes memorative, the arts of memory, or even the ars notoria, people have nevertheless misconstrued their nature and their application the same way that they did in the old days. Like illiterates. Take the ars notoria. You get all this talk about the notary art of Solomon. Nobody understands that the ars notoria comes out of a tradition of rhetoric associated with techniques developed by the great orator Cicero's freedman Tiro, Tironian notes. These got developed into mnemonic practices, and mnemonic practices were central to rhetoric, and rhetoric was central to any advanced education in the ancient world. So these techniques became associated with knowledge, power, and mastery, and hence with a kind of sorcery, again, for the illiterates. These people, like the ones today, mistook the rind, or the shell, for the fruit or the kernel. But in wrapping up this contextual exercise, I should emphasize that I'm not saying that everything can be reduced to what we like to think of as empirical explanations. I'm not saying that there's no magic in what's called magic. Quite the contrary, I'm saying that everything in the world is full of magic, rather than saying that there is an explanation for such things, for anything that might otherwise be considered esoteric, magic, out of the ordinary, supernatural, whatever. Rather than saying that, I'm instead saying that everything is inexplicable. I reveal here my pantheist sympathies. Anyway, in saying all of this, I have hopefully provided something vaguely like an introduction to a number of upcoming clips on esoterica, which I'll be titling as ESO, ESO. Each of these will be focused on a particular perspective or technique, and you can expect to see a couple of them coming up very soon. One that I'm planning will likely cover a very effective method that can be used for everything from composition to meditation or even therapy. And I'm considering a whole series of clips designed to make would-be practitioners of meme magic far more formidable than they currently are. So all you 4chan alt-right types with your graphics of Pepe, stay tuned, because I'm going to be talking much more about things that can be applied to your so-called meme magic. Praise Keck. Nevertheless, whether explicit or implicit, when it comes to all of these envisioned videos in the ESO series, that really this clip is just an introduction to, when it comes to all of these videos, it's fundamentally going to be about acquiring, extending self-knowledge. I hope you will stay tuned for more. Now, before I sign off, I do want to mention that I've been having some weirdness going on with my YouTube subscribers. People have been complaining to me that they were dropped as subscribers without them doing anything. That's some crap going on with YouTube. I've also noticed that I've gained a couple of thousand subscribers recently, but for the last 2 weeks, the number goes up. So, you'll see the number increasing as more people sign up. But when I go to my subscriber listing where I can see the new people who come on, that has not been refreshed for 2 weeks. So something weird is going on with it. Don't know what it is. I bring it up just so that, make sure you're subscribed if you care to be. And make sure you click the little bell for notifications. And that is pretty much it. Get it? Got it? Good. Semiagog out.